Hello everyone, my name is Paul. Welcome back to the new news. I hope that everyone is having a great day, that you're safe, that your friends and family are safe, and if not, I really do hope you find that safety and security in the near future. But luckily, when it comes to that kind of stuff, obviously a lot of the stuff that gets reported in the news really isn't all that great. It's a lot of pretty bad stuff overall. You're talking about war, you're talking about death and famine and drought and all sorts of stuff that really doesn't make you feel good inside. A lot of people are in those desperate situations. They don't have that safety and security. But luckily, you guys have been able to help. You guys have been able to make this a community where that's what this is all about. And truly, that's what we're doing here. So if you go and you check out in the description, you'll see that there are going to be a ton of different donation links, and we have a ton more that we're currently looking through that you guys have provided as a community. Please keep those coming. You can find our Discord link in the description below. Let us jump on there. Let a staff member know if you have an additional donation link, or a charity. We vet these things ourselves. We want to make sure that you guys are safe and that you're protected from potential scams. And we want to actually help people throughout the world. So, one, we make sure that these are verified organizations. These are organizations you can go back through. You can check them out yourselves. You can go through their history, financial reports, etc. And you can see how their money is being spent and where it's going. And two, 80% or more of the donations that all of these organizations receive are actually going to help people. They're going directly to the programs. 20% or less is actually going to things like salaries and administration's costs. We're here to help people, not necessarily pay a CEO salary. So that is what we're here to do. We're never doing super chats on the channel. We're never doing, we're never going to push merchandise to you guys. It's all about making sure that we're helping people. We want to be able to help the very same people that we report on within these situations every single day, whether that's Ukraine, whether that's Ethiopia, whether that's Southeast Asia, Brazil, no matter what. We're constantly looking for more. We're constantly trying to expand that. When we get large enough, we'll even be putting a charity on every single stream, so that way you guys can donate directly through YouTube itself. But that's still a long way off, so we do it this way. And if you guys can't give a lot to these organizations, give a little. And if you can't give anything at all, give us a like, give us a subscribe, let your friends know about us. Come and join us on our Discord community so you can get those updates. Because the more people that are here, of course, you can come here and enjoy the news the way that we deliver it. But more importantly, however, the more people that are here, the more meaningful of an impact we can have as a community. The more people that are here, the more money is going to these charities. We can run charities on the stream, and the larger the community is, the more good overall we can do. So I thank you for the support that you've already given these organizations. It truly means a lot, considering that is the goal of this project, to not just deliver news, but to give back to the very news we report on. So thank you very much for supporting them. Thank you very much for supporting the channel thus far. And without further ado, we're going to dive right into the news. And that's going to start with our special report for day 133 in Ukraine. Day 133 has a lot of stuff in it, but mostly it can be summed up into something very simple, and that is heavy usage of artillery across the front. We're seeing heavy usage on both sides. We've been seeing that throughout the duration of the war. But today's engagements mostly consisted of artillery strikes by both sides and emplacing artillery all across the front. That's been the focus. The fighting within the Luhansk region has limited some, considering the Luhansk region, for all intents and purposes, while we can't completely independently confirm that it has been taken, it is either been completely taken or soon will be within the coming days, if not hours. So very significant changes in the battlescape that has lost some of the kinetic energy within the battlefield that we were seeing during the onslaught within the Luhansk region. And that's because Russian forces now have essentially completed that objective to take Luhansk in its entirety, and now they're going to be shifting where their main concentrations of forces are and where they are going to have their main and supporting efforts. Part of that may be reinforcing the Curson Oblast as gains are being made there, but we'll get to that towards the end of the Ukraine segment. We first start off up here in Kyiv, where a rather pretty terrible statistic has come out. This is coming from Viktor Lyashko, who is the Minister of Healthcare of Ukraine, and he states, quote, since the beginning of Russia's full-scale war against Ukraine, Russian occupiers have destroyed 122 Ukrainian medical establishments, 14 Ukrainian medical workers were killed, and 48 injured. Last time we reported on this, we only knew of 2 that had been killed, at least according to the Ministry of Health. However, this shows a very drastic and important statistic. Under the Geneva Convention, there are explicit guidelines as to targeting strikes against healthcare facilities and workers and convoys and vehicles and anything carrying the flag of the Red Cross. But we have seen throughout this war where there are buildings clearly marked as a medical infrastructure that have a hole in the rooftop, or where military vehicle, or where medical vehicles in at least some capacity, staged or unstaged, staged or not, have ammunition inside of them. We've seen that throughout the duration of this war. This statistic alone, 122 medical establishments, that's not a coincidence. This isn't something that just happens as collateral, because under Geneva Convention, you should be preventing this. And that's specifically under Protocol 1, as well as the actual Geneva Convention in and of itself, where the targeting or the excessive use in areas of force in areas containing concentrations of medical personnel, such as a hospital, cannot be conducted because it's protected under the Geneva Convention, and it's necessary for the life of those, both civilians but also those who are no longer to engage in combat, non-combatant personnel, meaning those that are wounded, those who are in captivity, civilians, medical personnel that aren't active combatants in the battlefield. They're not considered active combatants at that point. So it's deprivation of life is essentially what that boils down to. Life in medical assistance. And that's not the only thing, as the medic, Teria, who is the medic from Mariupol that was released with a prisoner exchange, has kind of explained kind of the captivity situation in greater detail. And she spent some time in Russian captivity following her surrender there at Mariupol. And one of the quotes that was given here is the fact that there are 22 women in a 6x3 cell with only 10 beds. Pretty significant, but this kind of is something that we've heard before. And you can go on here, you can check out this whole thing going on here. This is specifically Anton Gerashenko, who is an advisor to the Minister of Foreign Affairs within Ukraine, and he talks about this whole thing. This is also something that was posted on DW. They treated us horribly. I had nothing all the time. What I had, 1 pair of underwear, 1 pair of pants, shoes, and some clothes, and that's it. They took all the rest from me and didn't allow me any phone connection or medical help. Lately, they kept me in a prison in Donetsk. Lots of our POWs are still there, treated horribly. They didn't even give us soap in the last week. There are 22 women in a 6x3 cell, 10 beds, no information about families and children, too. The moral condition was awful. And we can keep going with that. But this is something that we've heard. This is something that we already kind of expected. When we talked about the isolation colony, this is something that was specifically, talked about. This is a discussion we had here on the channel. And we talk about that with any of these major penal colonies. And penal colony number 52, also known as the isolation colony, is simply one example. The filtration camps, like the one near Bezimene, are a very similar situation. While they are stating, or at least the Russians have stated, that reportedly the one near Bezimene can hold up to 100,000 Ukrainians, the conditions aren't necessarily good. All we have to do is take a look at history to understand this. You look at the use of filtration camps during the First and Second Chechen War, whether that's the filtration camp or filtration point system, it doesn't matter, it's the same. Under the European Court of Human Rights, or the ECHR, there are prosecutions of individuals who were at these camps, working within these camps, running these camps, who conducted horrendous war crimes. This is where systematic abuse is constant. I'm talking about deprivation of sleep, medical assistance, deprivation of sanitation facilities, deprivation of food, purposeful starving and dehydration. I'm talking about systematic beatings, rape, torture, summary execution. All of this stuff is constant within these kinds of camps. That is something that history has proven to us, and that's the same thing that we hear now. And it's pretty astonishing when we hear from people who who have come back from these camps exactly what's happening there. But it comes as no surprise to anyone who's read at the very least a wiki article on what happened within these locations. Very less, if you've ever taken a deep dive in what happened, what has happened to people in facilities exactly like this. So pretty consistent there. So something that just got brought to my attention. Okay, so something just got brought to my attention. You might notice some things getting deleted in the chat, and I want to bring this up immediately, because I want to make sure that this is addressed. Okay. I understand that the situations that we talk about in this, especially when we're talking about atrocities committed by Russian forces or atrocities committed in general, bring up a lot of emotional reaction. And I think this is something that needs to be said, because I have a very, very distinct emotional reaction to some of these things, as one should, because that's really what gravitates to your moral compass. But I should be pretty explicit in saying this, and then that is, no, there needs not be any derogatory statements be made about anybody. I don't, I could say many derogatory statements about how I feel about, ISIS, who I have personally fought against. I could say all sorts of things about them. I could say all sorts of things that have happened, when it comes to the Russian people, and how what's happening to them under sanctions and how they're acting as people under sanctions, fighting over, food and basic supplies and sanitary products in places like Kaliningrad or Moscow. But I don't. I could easily call the very common phrase at this point in time is I could call the Russians orcs, and I don't do that. I don't think it's correct to do that. I think that should be left to some other individuals that may also be doing similar things and talking about these same subjects. But I don't believe that is the proper way to do things. I do not hold any hatred towards people themselves of any situation. I don't hate the Russian people. I may hate their government. I may hate other things. I may hate their government. I may hate their military and what they're doing. I don't hate the people themselves. And I think that's an important thing to understand here. It is emotional, and I understand why we say the things that we do, but I please ask that you contain yourselves when it comes to the chats that are happening and what you're saying, and be cognizant of this. Because that is not really the kind of community that I want to represent. I want to report the news in as much of an unbiased or plainly stated biased way, an apolitical way, in a way that's professional in manner, in a way that I think is, respectful to whoever we're talking about. So please refrain from talking about that here on the channel. I don't think it's correct, and if you say something like that, it will get deleted, and if you continue, we will just remove you, and I have no problem of doing that both on the chat and in the Discord, so please keep that in mind. Anyway, going back to what was being said before we hit on that, is the fact that what's happening in Mariupol, or what's happened to the people that have been deported out of Mariupol and have been taken and put in captivity under Russian occupation, is, and the best way to describe it, it's going to a concentration camp, and there's no other way to put it. When you look at the similarities between them, when you look at the fact that people, just to move around the city of Mariupol, require filtration paperwork, the similarities between that and the time, and the times that they spent, when you look back at history at places like the Warsaw Ghetto and the ghettos within Europe, for the Jewish people, and those that they did not see as fit for life, I would say, in the Nazi ideology. They were put in these locations, and it was deplorable, and how they were treated was deplorable. How they moved around, they couldn't move around. They had to have papers on them at all times, that showed who they were, their ethnicity, race. Eugenics at the time was popular, especially within Nazi Germany, which was the occupational force. And the situation within those camps can be akin to very much so. Mine is probably the crematoriums, which we do know exist mobily anyway in Mariupol, to the situation in the filtration camps. And once again, I highly recommend going and looking at their use during the First and Second Chechen War to understand why. And at the bare minimum, a wiki article, guys, it takes 10 minutes to get the picture, but if you do a deep dive, you're going to get in some pretty depressing stuff, just as a forewarning. We jump over here into Kharkiv, where the Hivriri Skovoroda Pedagogical University, which means that it's an institute for teaching, learning how to teach, was destroyed by a Russian missile early this morning. It's another pretty extensive infrastructure casualty. As we talked about yesterday, it was announced that over $100 billion of infrastructure damage has been done to Ukraine, in excess of that, which is very extensive. That's a large amount of destruction. The best precedent I could probably have would have been probably World War II, at least for Europe, and it's just immense. It's indescribable. And we see just another casualty of this. And this is an institute. This isn't like a military target. It's an institute of learning. It's a college or a university. And it's something else that must be rebuilt once this war is over. And you can see here the quote that they use here. This is from the official Defense Ministry of Ukraine. And this is the destruction to that institute. And you can see what this used to be prior to it. So this is the exact same space. It's taken from the left as opposed to the right here. But what this states is the founder, the main patron of this, stated, "We will build a better world, and we will make a brighter day come." And so that is the statement that's being made here. And of course, that has now all been destroyed. So very symbolic, to say the least. Not a lot more coming out of Slavyansk. Just more. Most of the stuff here that came out of Slavyansk is just the stuff that we had reported on yesterday when it came to the shelling in Slavyansk that ended up killing 2 and injuring an additional 7 at the marketplace. That was just confirmed by additional government agencies as opposed to our independent sources. But that is kind of the situation. We're going to see more shelling. More shelling has certainly probably occurred today. And the shelling is really increasing pretty heavily within Slavyansk, as the Russian forces are probably going to be pushing Slavyansk next. And the indicators are certainly there for that. The Russian doctrine really can be broken down into 3 different things, which I've discussed before. The first thing is they hit an area with saturation bombardment. It softens up the resistance and kind of breaks the morale of the troops that are there. Next, they do an armored spearhead, which is why you see heavy use of mechanized and motorized forces. A lot of tanks, a lot of BMPs, a lot of BMDs. You see that throughout the entire front. And that's because the Russian doctrine means that these go first. They put the big metal stuff in front of, the big heavy armored metal stuff in front of the squishy guys, their infantry, and they push through that. It's meant to basically blitzkrieg, break the lines of defense, demoralize the forces, and destroy them, and continue on. And the gaps that are created by that, by those armored spearheads, are then exploited by infantry who maneuver in and destroy and basically mop up the resistance behind the tank lines. So that's really the 3 categories within Russian doctrine when it comes to, at a very oversimplification of how they operate. Right now in Slavyansk and these regions, we're seeing the mass bombardment phase. And we saw this in Severodonetsk as the Russian troops were concentrating. As the Russian troops pushed into Severodonetsk, we saw them shift from one side of the city to the next. They shifted their fires, prevented friendly fire, red on red. If you look at this as a hostile country, as Russia as being the hostile nation, it would be red on red. If you're just talking about friendly fire in general, it'd be blue on blue. And they, as Russian forces continue to push through Severodonetsk, what we saw is they shifted their artillery fire from Severodonetsk to Lysychansk, which was the next main objective, even though the Battle of Severodonetsk was not over yet. And now that Lysychansk has been taken and the Luhansk has fallen, the reconcentration of Russian forces and the indicators that we're seeing is that Slavyansk is likely the next major objective along this route. So we're going to be watching and observing for further on actions within this area, but at this point it's any man's game and any man's guess. You could say very similar things about the area around Bakhmut right now. You could say the very similar things around areas, throughout this entire front where we've seen an uptick in shelling as over the recent couple of days. As we jump down further here, we can see that the Russian bombardment within the Donetsk also continues. Once again, that's kind of the theme of the day, where this is Pavel Korolenko, who is the head of the Donetsk Regional Military Administration, has stated, quote, Russian aggressors fired at missiles at the Donetsk region on July the 4th. So this is a late report coming in. 5 people were killed, 21 citizens were injured. Pretty immense. These reports, what they usually are stating is usually anywhere from 12 to 24 hours after the fact. That's usually where you see official statements and quotes coming out for. So please keep in mind that a lot of this information is not immediately up to date. It's just freshly released when it comes to official statements. And it gives us good pictures, kind of what's happening on the ground, at least at official capacity. And here in the Donetsk, though, we can go ahead and safely say that a fuel refinery has been targeted. Several areas have been targeted throughout Donetsk today, and we've seen a lot of large fires, large plumes of smoke. So obviously, military targets have been hit. Donetsk, not only is it a large city and really the capital of the Donetsk People's Republic, quote unquote, which is just an occupied territory of Ukraine, but it's a major logistical hub for Russian forces. They have a lot of ammunition depots that were put here, many of which have been targeted and destroyed. Mobile command centers are located here. Field commands are located here. Fuel depots, oil depots are located here. All of this stuff necessary for the Russian war machine to continue going. And they're being targeted even more accurately now that Ukraine has gotten NATO equipment in, such as the HIMARS system and the M777 155mm artillery batteries. That allows them to put much more precision artillery on target, minimize collateral damage, and also with pinpoint accuracy destroy these targets at an astonishing rate, which we've seen a major uptick in this over the last about week and a half, 2 weeks. But we can take a look at that here. As we continue down over here, we saw something that really gives us a good indicator that Russian logistics have really broken down. And it was something that we've known about for a long time now. You don't have to look very far into the war to see where Russian logistics just realized they could not conduct this operation realistically. Russia only had about, in active service, they deployed 15 battalion tactical groups to actually fight in Ukraine with the initial invasion force. That requires roughly about 6,000 to 6,500 vehicles, support logistical vehicles. Russia only had about 4 to 4,500 in service. They only had about 2/3 of what they needed to actually supply and logistically handle that many active battalion tactical groups in active combat throughout the invasion force. They did not have enough. And they started the invasion thinking they did, quickly realized they didn't. And then on top of that, they were also taking we're taking a lot of casualties. A lot of these vehicles were being destroyed in very rapid number and very rapid succession. We saw where they were grabbing civilian vehicles and still are grabbing civilian vehicles. And that's another instance today that we see here in the Donbass. This is just a semi, and it just has a trailer in the back of this semi. It's clearly marked, but it's filled with troops. It's being used to transport troops. You would not see this. This is something that you would see out of a third world military power. This isn't something you expect from what was truly considered before the invasion the second largest army in the world. And this really emphasizes the losses Russia is taking to its logistical capabilities. And in war, logistics and economies mean everything. You can win a battle, sure, as long as the guy has enough ammunition on him and you outlast the enemy or kill and destroy them. Sure, you'll win the battle, but when their counterattack comes in, and the guy's out of ammo and you can't get him more ammo, then it doesn't matter. If the tank can be as heavily armored and as great as it wants to be, but if it doesn't have ammo and it doesn't have gas, it's not going to do much for you other than maybe be a big battering ram should you at least get gas to it. But if you don't even have that, then it's just a big hunk of metal sitting in a field. So Russian logistics have broken down. They probably didn't have the logistical transport vehicles to actually, move these troops in a proper military vehicle. We do know that many of their KAMAZ vehicles or KAMZAs are not armored vehicles. That we've seen them put rudimentary armor onto them, homemade armor plating, but we haven't seen any that are really up armored, purpose-built armored vehicles, which means that they're already exposed. So I'm sure it doesn't really make a difference in that respect, as protection or not. But it just kind of highlights this photo highlights their inability to actively provide their troops with what's needed for the war. And we see that here. We saw this before, and as we continue to see it, the situation's only going to grow worse because more logistical vehicles will be destroyed. More ammunition depots are going to be destroyed and fuel depots. And if you don't have that equipment, if you don't have the ammo, the fuel, the oil, the vehicles to conduct a war, it won't matter. It won't matter how many troops you have because they won't be able to fight, or they will refuse to. We jump up over here where we see how Russians are booby-trapping hand grenades within the woods. And this is a very old tactic. I mean, this has been done before, but it's something that needs to be highlighted. If any Ukrainian troops ever watch this, this is something to be very cognizant about, because this is very hard to see. I mean, almost essentially impossible until you've already sprung the trap. You're not going to notice. And what it is you need to be cognizant when you're walking through clear paths. Take the path of most resistance. This is something that gets taught, at least I was taught when I was in the Marine Corps. Don't just take the main road, because the main road is pre-sighted. There's an ambush along there somewhere. It's littered with IEDs and booby traps and landmines, and everyone expects you to take the main road. So climb the hill next to the road. Don't take the path in the woods. Go offset yourself 25 meters off the road and then go through the woods on the side of the road. But just take a look at this here. You'll see this is it be impossible to spot unless until you sprung it, really.
Очень страшная вещь. Вот здесь вроде ничего нет, да? Идет человек специально, этим, кстати, решат чеченцы, цепляется вот такой крючочек. И его даже не чувствуешь. Кстати, он практически, бляха, футболку, наверное, придется после этого делать. Вот идет леска, и вверх F1 граната лежит. Сразу же запал идет и сечет все, что можно в радиусе. Причем таких вот крючочков, вот, не замечаешь на леске, они болтаются. Вот здесь вот здесь вот. Особенно это для военных. С этим надо заморачиваться. Вот, кстати, находится, да. Ты даже можешь не замечать. Можешь чем угодно, шлемом, я не знаю, рюкзаком туристическим. Вот здесь вот он идет. Ну все.
Simple. It's a very simple trick, but it's very effective. all you need is to be able to. All you need some fishing line. You need a couple of you need a couple of barbs, something that will catch, some hooks, and your nearest tree and a hand grenade. And that fragmentation grenade is going to explode, and it's not just going to go up and out. It's going to blast because it's at a higher level. It's not just a hand grenade on the ground. That's going to increase its lethality, because it's going to now explode out in all directions, not just up and out, like a grenade normally would if it was on the ground. Which means that you have more of a chance of catching shrapnel off of it. That wood is going to explode and splinter, adding to the shrapnel. In fact, that's exactly why cannonballs remained solid shot for so long, because they would punch through the side of a ship and the splinters would kill the crew. They didn't have to sink the ship. It's extremely dangerous. So that it's an old school trick, but it's a very effective trick, and we can see this. This isn't the only booby trap. There have been plenty more. All you gotta do is look at when Bucha, Irpin, Hostomel, Boryanka were all liberated, and how many booby traps and mines and hand grenades were placed all over the place in there. There's one inside of a piano, and then we covered that here on the channel. There's one inside a piano, so when you played the piano, it would set it off. So, but very effective and very, very hard to spot. So, Ukrainian troops, if you're watching this, offset yourself 25 meters off the road. Take the path less traveled. Take the path of most resistance, because you will take less casualties if you do so. It sucks. The hiking sucks, I know. As you jump over here, we have a Darwin Award recipient. So, Comrade here was given the Darwin Award. However, it was presented posthumously to him after he rendered a S-300 battery useless at close range using his PKP machine gun. But luckily, there was videographers on site, and we now can witness Comrade's honor and sacrifice for the Russian military right here on the channel. So let's take a look at the world's newest Darwin Award recipients.
Готов? Готов. Огонь.
Wow, missiles explode when they get shot. Absolutely crazy. Also, yeah, something that just got pointed out by a staff member: civilians in Ukraine, be cognizant of the fishing lines too. Because troops get trained on how to do this usually. Civilians that aren't aware are the most at risk, honestly. Because at least, you're cognizant, you're looking for it, to an extent if you're in a combat zone. I mean, it takes a mental toll on you doing so, but it's something that you do look for. But civilians don't. Kids especially. So if they're children, or you have children and you're in Ukraine, make sure they're close. And make sure to stay out of the woods, stay out of areas that troops were at and active combat was taking place. It's just smarter. We jump down here, and I'm pretty sure we have the location of this bridge. But another bridge was destroyed near Melitopol. And so I'm pretty sure this is the bridge. I cannot confirm, but it's the only bridge that fits the description within the region. So that's, but that bridge has effectively been destroyed by Ukrainian forces. So what was said specifically is this is from Alexander Staruk, who is the head of the Zaporozhye Regional Military Administration, and he has stated another bridge is tired, quote unquote, between Melitopol and Tomahawk, Novobovidka, and Troyske. And when looking at this on the map, this is Melitopol. Down here, you have Troyske, you have, let's see here, you have Novobadimka. So, what we did is I went through and I was looking for where this could have been, and that's when I found the river here, the Molochna River, and the only major railway bridge crossing this river is this one. That's the only one that I could spot on the map, the only main bridge that I can spot on the map, and this would be probably the most important military target to hit, and also probably the easiest for any forces to hit. So you can safely say this is likely the bridge that has been destroyed, and that would cut off the Russian rail lines from resupplying troops in Melitopol and the Kherson Oblast, if true, at least coming from other regions such as over here in the Donetsk and Luhansk, as they shift their concentrations of forces. If we move over here into Hadar, the cameras and sensors have gone dark inside the plant over the last couple of days. The Wall Street Journal has discovered that Russians are setting up heavy artillery batteries inside the region of the plant and have laid anti-personnel mines along the shores of the reservoirs and the coolers of the 6 reactors. These reservoirs that cool the 6 reactors. Sorry, I misspoke. Basically, they have dug trench lines all around the facility. So, according to Ukrainian Defense Minister Andrei Sogorodnyuk, sorry, my pronunciation is pretty terrible. It seems that this is one of the Russian tactics to take critical infrastructure and use it as a shield. We're not going to storm the plant. The only way to do it would be to surround it and take the surrounding areas and ask them to leave. If you guys want to check it out, the Wall Street Journal article is there if you guys want to read in onto that. But it wouldn't be very surprising. So you jump over here into the Kherson Oblast. We see here in Kherson where a railway depot was destroyed by Ukrainian troops, and the partisan threat continues. So, the railway station, most likely a fuel depot, has been destroyed by Ukrainian artillery today. As these partisan threats continue within the Oblast, as partisans are really starting to come out of the woodwork more. We do know that they are highly active within this region. And according to Sergei Klon, the advisor to the head of the Kherson Regional Military Administration, in Kherson, quote, in Kherson, Russian military warehouses near the railway station were destroyed, end quote. And we can see this here. And here we can see some of those partisan threats. So that would be the uniform of a Russian soldier with the invasion markings on it, covered in what I'm going to say is paint to represent blood. It doesn't look like that's actual blood, but yeah, the partisans are definitely at work. This is a very clear message if you couldn't tell. Let's jump up over here into Mykolaiv. One person is dead following a Russian shelling here in Nachyan in the Mykolaiv Oblast. Rocket attack on the village in Nachyan in the Mykolaiv region on July 6. One citizen was killed. Local buildings and a building of a cafe were damaged, and that's coming from the Operational Command South, which operates within this entire region. We can also see similar things happening today. However, they were avoided by Ukrainian defense or air defense systems. Quote, in the Odessa region on July the 6th, Ukrainian air defense forces shot down 2 Russian missiles coming from Operational Command South. Roughly 6:30 p.m. local time, another report was that a 3rd Russian missile had been shot down within the Odessa Oblast, making that 3 total missiles shot down today coming out of this region. All of these reportedly were shot by the Black Sea Fleet operating off the coast. So we still see a lot of activity coming from the Black Sea Fleet, which continues to pull back and rearm in Sevastopol, and usually they use their submarines, since surface vessels are susceptible, much like the Moskva. They're susceptible to Ukrainian harpoon missiles once they get close the distance with the Ukrainian shore, and so most of the time we see their submarines firing the caliber cruise missiles from their missile stations within the submarine itself. They will pull out of Sevastopol. They will dive. They will move in close enough to fire their missiles. They launch their missile systems, dive and do an emergency dive again, and then exfil from the area. But that is actually all of the news in Ukraine. Pretty significant amount of shelling. Once again, that's kind of the theme of the day. Artillery and heavy weapons usage, it really dictates this entire war. It's much more of a similarity with World War I than it is a 21st century war. We see this not in just the usage of artillery so heavily, but also the trench systems that we've seen. Modern war has really we haven't had a major war in Europe since World War II. That was the last major ground war in Europe, and a lot of things have developed heavily since then. We can see these developments play critical roles inside of the ongoing war in Ukraine, in how tactics need to change. This war will be studied for decades and hundreds of years to come in regards to technological changes and how long times of peace mean that there is a drastic change in how warfare is fought, and a huge learning curve for both ends, for both warring parties or all warring parties, as to how to conduct warfare and adapt their tactics and strategies there on the ground. And we see kind of a throwback into World War I because of this. The wars have gotten so deadly that you need to stay below ground. Where the machine gun caused trench warfare in World War I, heavy usage of artillery, missile systems, armored forces, and the anti-tank guided missile have caused trench warfare here in the Donbass. And with that, we go ahead and we move on into the international news, and we start up here in Moscow, where 3 different statements have thus far come out. The first one is the fact that this is Medvedev, who promises the U.S. could face the wrath of God, quote, if it presses for war crimes court. Quote, the U.S. and its useless stooges should remember the words of the Bible, do not judge or you will not be judged, so that the great day of his wrath does not come to their home one day. This is coming from Medvedev, who is referring to the Bible and the apocalypse. Also probably hinting at nuclear weapons. But that's also trying to put a strong message out there that you will not prosecute war crimes against Russian forces. But we will. That's the thing. We will prosecute war crimes. In fact, it's ongoing. But that is coming from the Associated Press. And also coming from a senior Russian official within the State Duma. In fact, the chairman of the State Duma stated that that Russia should conduct a special operation to take back Alaska as it once belonged to the Russian Empire. Aside from starting World War III, which is exactly what would happen, Russia doesn't maintain the active military forces to conduct such an operation, nor the Navy to conduct an amphibious operation, which would be required across the Bering Strait. They'd also be fighting in a logistical nightmare because they wouldn't be able to support their forces to do so. Because they can't support the forces with rail lines and aircraft and just trucks on what is essentially the Russian steppe. So how they would do this, I have no idea. But that's, yeah. Just take a listen.
Слабость. Нам есть всегда чем ответить. А Америка пускай всегда помнит. Там есть часть ее территории, Аляска. Вот когда они начинают пытаться распоряжаться нашими ресурсами за границей, прежде чем это делать, подумают, что нам есть что тоже возвращать. Порядочность не слабость.
To say the least, it would not exactly probably go in their favor. Then Russia would be fighting a two-front war. If anyone has ever read anything in history, they know that two-front wars usually don't end up in anyone's favor. So, pretty, yeah. I can't, yeah. I have no idea how they would do this. Sorry, I'm reading some of the comments right now. I'm seeing a lot of things about schizophrenia, delusion, needing psychiatrists, and of course one of the mods here, Kason, stated interesting that they gave up on the "we didn't commit war crimes" narrative. Well, a lot of reports usually will do that to you. That usually happens. A lot of reports from organizations you're a part of usually will do that to you, to include the United Nations and the OSCE, both of which have delegations from the Russian Federation. Of course, the the Council of Humanitarian Rights did kick Russia out, but they're still part of the UN. Surprisingly, that they haven't been kicked out of that yet. But what can you do, I guess? But yes, Alaska is a U.S. state. Also, Russia's military is already essentially collapsed upon itself, and what's left is fighting in the Donbass right now. I'm pretty sure attacking the United States in a logistical nightmare that would be Alaska. Think of it this way. Japan, which had one of the strongest navies in the world, expanded across the entire Pacific, took the Aleutian Islands and abandoned it. It was so abysmal that they abandoned they abandoned Adak Island. They abandoned all of these, like Kiska, all of these. The Japanese Empire didn't care, knowing that Alaska had a ton of natural resources that could help the Japanese Empire, and knowing that Alaska was, probably very undefended compared to mainland United States, took a couple islands and left them before U.S. invasion forces even showed up to the party in 1942. They left. What chance does Russia have? Yeah, Max Crew just stated they can't even take Kyiv. Yeah, they can't. They don't have... Also, I don't think anyone's looked at anything but probably Google Maps on this, but Alaska is massive. It's absolutely massive. How are you going to take that? I get it. You probably wouldn't freeze to death in Alaska. Well, you might, considering you can't supply your forces ammunition and water and food that's not rotting, but... it's just mind-blowing that they would suggest such a thing. Going back to Russia, though, despite already having confirmations that this has happened, according to the Russians, anyway, the Russian Ministry of Foreign Affairs has stated that their grain ship in Turkey, has not been detained and is simply undergoing regular procedures at the port. This is coming from their official Twitter account. Zaitsev, who's the spokesman for their Ministry of Foreign Affairs, has stated, "We have taken note of media reports that the alleged arrest of the Russian-flagged vessel Zivkeb Zoli was in the port of Curson, Turkey. The vessel has not been arrested, but is undergoing standard procedures at the port. This is despite the Ukrainian ambassador to Turkey already stating on July the 3rd that the ship had been detained by Ukrainian authorities and was under investigation for carrying over 4,000 tons of stolen Ukrainian grain. And after the Donetsk, after the DPR, quote unquote, their government, stated that it was the first ship to leave out of the port of Berdyansk. What? So Berdyansk confirmed it after they loaded it, which is, already kind of, wow, look, we just are shipping stolen Ukrainian grain, which the world's been talking about for weeks now. And then Ukraine from Turkey confirms it, from their ambassador to Turkey. And then Russia says no. This is like the Tochka-U missile, guys. You guys deployed a Tochka-U missile. We have 6 instances of where they had a Tochka-U missile from when they hit Kramatorsk. We covered it in 6 separate points to show you that it was false. Once again, we have 2 confirmations that this is happening. One of them from the government of the DPR, stating that this is happening, and they still say no. Pretty overwhelming evidence, to say the least. We jump over here to the United Kingdom, where the first wave of Ukrainian recruits has arrived. The UK has promised and set aside £2.3 billion in order to train 10,000 new Ukrainian military recruits. The training program is happening across bases throughout the United Kingdom, and it's giving Ukrainian forces a safe place to train, as their training facilities have been targeted in the past within the western part of Ukraine. But it's also giving them a modern military training from NATO allies, from NATO partners, and that's going to allow essentially them to increase their efficiency on the battlefield. Which, when I say efficiency, I truly mean their lethality. That gives them a Western military training, which is proven to be pretty substantial in its capability. And once again, 10,000 Ukrainian troops. How much of an impact does this make in the war? 10,000 troops is a pretty immense amount of people. That's a lot of troops, and they're trained in a Western military way, as opposed to the Ukrainian military training them, and what is a lot of former Soviet, military styles, because that's what a lot of their commanders would have been trained to do, and how they would have developed their military strategy and doctrine. This is going to be much more Western focused, probably a lot more NATO focused and oriented in how they conduct their operations, small unit tactics, and all this translates to flexibility, adaptability, and your combat methodology there on the battlefield, how you operate as an individual, what you're aware of, what you're not. Some things will come with time. That is experience. Training does go a long way, but experience also goes a long way. And as these new recruits, once they get fielded, after they go through this training in X amount of time, then they will be sent to the battlefield. They'll get that experience, and they'll also be able to teach these tactics to other people that are in the units that they're already going to. And bring these tactics, to the attention, and hopefully we'll start to see a shift in strategy and tactics throughout Ukraine, at least at the small unit level, which is where the differences on the battlefield truly take place. But this is confirmed by the Ukrainian Ministry of Defense. It's not the only thing happening, though, within the United Kingdom. As many people are probably already well aware, and this is a big topic that was happening on the Discord from my understanding. I didn't get too much of a chance to look. But there's it's very possible that there's going to be a vote of confidence, or I should say a vote of no confidence in British Prime Minister Boris Johnson. He has refused to resign his position. This comes as nearly 40 members of his cabinet have resigned their positions, many of which we have their resignations here to show you. Many of them very high-level resignations, many high-level ministers within his cabinet. He just had a confidence vote last month. He's barely survived that. It only 41%, or 41% voted against him. That is probably going to shift here very quickly. And that gives him a 12-month immunity from another one, which means that he has, for some time to maybe make a turnaround, but it's not a good image that he has right now. Some lawmakers in his own party have been trying to change the party rules to shorten that immunity period. So that's pretty significant. If Johnson is ousted, the process would be held to find a new leader, and that process, which was overseen by the 1922 committee, is likely to, or this is how it's likely to work. Candidates putting themselves forward for the leadership must be nominated by 2 other conservative lawmakers. Those lawmakers must then hold several rounds of votes to whittle down the number of candidates. And each time they are asked to vote for their favored candidate in a secret ballot, and the person with the fewest votes is eliminated. The process is repeated until there are only 2 candidates remaining. The final 2 candidates are then put to a postal ballot to the wider Conservative Party membership, with the winner being named the new leader. And the leader of the party, with the majority of the House of Commons, is the de facto Prime Minister of the United Kingdom. And Reuters has reported heavily on this. If you guys want to go check it out, we're going to show this video too, where he has that leaning there in Parliament. But so this is coming from Sajid Javid, who is in charge of the health and social care. He's the Secretary of State for Health and Social Care within the United Kingdom. This is his official resignation, which he tendered to Boris Johnson. Oh, that's the same one. This is Rishi Sunak, who also, this is his letter of resignation. He tendered this to the Prime Minister as well. He was in charge of basically the finance of the economy and finance of the United Kingdom. So he is no longer working in that capacity. This is Sally Ann, who has tendered their resignation. I am no longer able to support Boris Johnson as leader of the Conservative Party and Prime Minister. Will Quince, his resignation. He's the Minister for Children and Families. Felicity Buchan, sorry, who is the Parliamentary Private Secretary in the Department of Business, Energy, and Industrial Strategy. And also the whip of the party. And despite all of this, this is coming from the questioning there in the House of Commons.
When things are tough, of course people turn their fire on the leader of the country, but it is my job to get on and deliver our manifesto, which we are, and to deliver on the mandate on which I was elected, and to get this country through tough times, just as we got it through COVID. And that is what I'm going to do.
Fielder Bruce.
So he is refusing to resign despite all of the pretty condemning resignations at this point. Once again, almost 40 different ministers. So some of the concerns, some of which have been voiced in the chat too, is the fact that basically whoever comes after Boris Johnson may have a 180 in policy. And so I'm not going to get into policy or the politics here. What I can probably say safely is that there is a pretty united front for backing Ukraine. And that's a pretty wide scope of capacities. The laws that have been passed and the things that have been already been passed in Parliament have passed with pretty good majorities anyway. And that stuff isn't going away. You can't just wipe that stuff off the table. It's passed through Parliament. It's approved by Parliament. Those are going to go into effect and continue to be into effect. So anything that has been passed thus far, probably that stuff's not going to change. Those actions aren't going to change. They've already been approved. Forward-looking policy. I wouldn't expect major shift when it comes to Russian policy and what's going on in Ukraine. I think this is probably a much more long-standing issue than what was happening with Ukraine, and the lead up to this. This is just, from my understanding of the situation, and I'm not British nor am I an expert in this, but there's been some long-standing issues with Boris Johnson from within his own party and his support, and that is just kind of coming to a head as things like economic problems that's happening as a result of sanctions are popping up. You have increased prices globally for commodities. The United Kingdom, being an island and having to import a lot of stuff, is also feeling that that pressure quite substantially. And so it's just not going well. And it sounds like there's been a lot of closed door problems too that have been addressed. If you read through some of the resignations, they kind of hint at that there's some fundamental differences that they can't agree with. They can't find any kind of compromisation from him with, at least at an individual behind closed doors level, that is making them feel in this way. And so I think that is a I think ultimately what's happening is it's a long-standing issue that is happening at probably a poor time, but that is, I don't expect policy regarding Ukraine to have a drastic shift, no matter what happens. We jump down here. This is in North Macedonia, where large protests and clashes are occurring here. This is in Skopje. In North Macedonia. 47 officers were injured after a group threw stones, metal bars, and Molotov cocktails at the parliament building in the capital. Protesters broke out after Bulgaria announced some demands in order for Macedonia to be a candidate for the EU. Macedonia is required to recognize the Bulgarian minority in the constitution and agree that the Macedonian language is a dialect of Bulgarian, as well as to amend the official version of the country's history. So, pretty big cultural demands from Bulgaria, to say the least. And I can understand why people would be upset about that. I don't know very much about Bulgaria and North Macedonia. I don't know a whole lot about their history or anything like that. That's something I have to read up on. But quite an immense amount of obviously a lot of tension there. Also, Molotov cocktails are kind of terrifying. I don't think that I want to be one of those police officers right there. Molotov cocktails are pretty terrifying, to say the least. Not my, and that's a lot of people, and that's not a lot of walls between you and these people. But very obviously a lot of tensions there. They're very upset about these demands, and we're going to have to watch this, and I'm going to have to read up more on the history between North Macedonia and Bulgaria going forward, because it sounds like this is probably going to heat up before it cools down. And so we jump down here into the Middle East, where we have a couple of different things coming out of the Middle East. We'll start up here in Kazakhstan, where there's some rather odd timing. First, there was an explosion at the biggest oil and gas refinery in the country, killing 2 and injuring an additional 3. And then Russia all of a sudden cut off their oil transit through the Caspian pipeline. Why this has occurred, we don't know. But we can take a look at some video footage here.
Экскватор, завод Таратотра. Înceaptă bradam cu ultăs.
бесплатно. Чем солдат подпишется?
And here we can see more. So this immediately began after pretty much Kazakhstan refused to recognize the DPR and LPR. And they did so at the SPIEF summit. They said that sitting right next to Vladimir Putin stated that. So pretty obviously Russian gas is no longer, obviously Russian oil is no longer flowing through the pipeline. This should probably be taken. This should probably be looked at. This is probably something that Europe should probably be looking at, because this shows Russian government willingness to cut off using gas and oil pipelines for political reasons. And that's kind of what we can get from this. It's very odd timing. It's very, you have to understand, what was said prior to this, and understand that Kazakhstan officially stated they would not recognize the LPR and DPR, and Russia has cut off their oil. So that shows very much a willingness to use oil and gas for political means, regardless of what is being stated, and shows really the true extensiveness of why it's important for Germany and other European countries to cut that dependency on Russian oil and gas and other amenities, despite the difficulties, because it's probably going to happen sooner or later. Down here along the border between Afghanistan and Uzbekistan, the day after here in Termez, or near Termez, where rockets were fired, 5 in fact, no casualties however, but some damaged civilian property. The Taliban militants over on the Afghanistan side found launchers from which the settlement was fired, or the rockets were fired at the settlement of Termez in Uzbekistan. Leadership of the group has promised to find the organizers of the attack, but no one has yet taken responsibility for the shooting. There are a couple of them, as you can see here, like I talked about yesterday. They just put it in the back of a truck. And all it is, look at it, it's just welded tubes together. That's all it is. They just welded some tubes together. They, put some bars there, braced it in the bed of the truck, probably welded it to the frame. And then what these fire, Katyusha rockets. They fire the smaller variants of the Katyusha rocket, which goes up. I think the most common one now is the 122 millimeter Katyusha. It fires out of the BM-21 Grad, but they made much smaller variants that way they could fire with more of them as opposed to a larger warhead. But yeah, very simple. This is the same kind of style that they used against us at the U.S. Embassy in Baghdad, except theirs fired over top of the cab. So they had it angled over the top of the cab. You drove it. You pointed the front end of the truck at whatever you wanted to shoot at, launched the rockets. And instead, this time, they have it backwards out of the cab. And they try to cover it up with a bunch of fruits and vegetables and whatever else, and which is pretty egregious considering the economic situation that Afghanistan's currently in, and the fact that people are starving. We jump down here into Kabul with a National Resistance Front, which is headed by Ahmad al-Massoud, whose father was actually killed by the Taliban. Anyway, he has a resistance fighter group that has been fighting against the Taliban since the Taliban take over the country and the U.S. and coalition withdrawal. And they attacked Taliban positions in the city of Kabul today. Yeah, quick attack. Nice, fast-paced guerrilla tactics. But the Taliban have also done that for some time. Now, before I move on into Africa, something was addressed, or something came from the chat. They said, don't underestimate Russia's ability to, pretty much mess around with the United Kingdom's politics and their media. And I think that is something that very good to point out, and I don't underestimate that, because underestimation is the exact same thing that put Russia into the situation that they're in now. They underestimated Ukraine, they underestimated NATO and the willingness to sanction them so heavily. They underestimated how many countries would at least dissent, or abstain to their actions to allow memorandums to go through even without voting for them. They underestimated a lot of things. They even underestimated China's willingness to, at least in a very open and a very massive way, support them. And there's a lot of things to be said about what Russia is capable of doing. In fact, the United Kingdom, MI5, and the FBI released their very first joint statement in history in regards to Chinese interference within politics and the media. So I have no doubt in my mind that a very similar case is going on with Russia too, and that there's probably a lot of interagency play. But I don't doubt Russia's ability to play with this stuff. This is something that has been ongoing for years. We know it has been. There's official reports from government agencies around the world of Russian interference in their media and politics. Entire countries are cutting out Russian media entirely to prevent some of this. Obviously, everywhere has a bias. That's why we try to remain as independent as possible on this stuff, unless we clearly state a bias like we have for Ukraine. But there is, I don't underestimate their abilities, but the political atmosphere and the social atmosphere in the world, right now, especially in Western countries, I think is too great for it to reasonably have a major impact on policy change. And once again, these policies are already approved, many of them, what we see now, and that's not going to change. The stuff's already greenlit, it's already going to happen, and it's already been approved, funds have been allocated. So that's really where my opinion on that policy comes from. And a safe majority, too. Because if Russia was going to interfere with those politics, they probably would have already done so to try and hinder what aid is already happening. And Ukrainian troops are being trained on the United Kingdom soil by United Kingdom forces. So that's where my thoughts on that matter are. Anyway, here in Nigeria, the Islamic State actually attacked a prison in the Nigerian capital here of Abuja, and what happened was late at night, the Islamic State attacked the city's prison, and they killed 10 people in total, including several officers, according to eyewitnesses. And the attackers, without receiving significant resistance from the security forces, broke into their correctional facility and released more than 700 prisoners, 500 of which were Boko Haram militants. The country's authorities claim that security forces have detained several hundred fugitives, but about 440 remain on the run. The Islamic State did claim responsibility for the prison attack. So we can take a look at this here.
My cameraman is just coming with my boss now. So
we can see here the Islamic State announcement regarding the attack, claiming responsibility. And that brings us up into North America. We can see that a Canadian scientist discovered a huge hole in the ozone layer. Kingbin Liu, who is a professor at the University of Waterloo here in Canada, says he discovered a massive hole in the ozone layer over the tropical region of the planet, which could impact 50% of the world's population. So it's 7 times the size of the well-known Antarctic ozone hole that emerged during the spring, or that emerges during spring. And through his research, Liu claims that he found a massive hole is present year-round and has been there since 1980, approximately 40 years. And its presence could have devastating consequences for life on Earth. And we actually have his entire full paper here for you guys, if you guys want to end up checking it out. But it's pretty impressive. But holes in the ozone layer cause immense amount of stuff, immense amount of impact. when it comes to how climate change, how climates change, how global warming occurs. And the reason why is because the ozone layer does a couple of things. First of all, the ozone layer shields the Earth from incoming, incoming sunlight, essentially, and that is what makes it so planet is inhabitable. You're not getting deadly amounts of radiation from the sun while you're on planet Earth, or at least unless you're staying outside and for extended periods of time and just standing in the sun baking yourself. You're not getting dangerous amounts of radiation, and infrared light. So that's what's happening because of the ozone layer. Having holes in it means that now can flow through. It's no longer protected. And that's what the hole in the ozone layer does, which causes the Earth to heat more rapidly because there's nothing to protect it. Likewise, the reverse, going the other direction, is equally dangerous. The issue with I believe it's Venus, which is covered in a pretty massive amount of ozone. Basically, that's their entire atmosphere. It looks like a gas giant. It's not. Or it looks like a gaseous planet. It's not. They have a very thick ozone layer. And so that heats the planet up to essentially melting point. So if you were to be on the surface of Venus, you would melt, essentially. If I remember correctly. But that having too much of an ozone layer traps too much heat within the atmosphere, and therefore also warms up the planet. You can't go too far one way, and you can't go too far the other. Either way, you screw up the planet essentially irreversibly. And being there since the 1980s means that heavy industrialization and a lot of the chemicals that are being released into the atmosphere prior to a lot of these environmental changes and environmental requirements, limiting the amount of CO2 going into the atmosphere, limiting the amount of chemicals being released into the atmosphere that destroy the ozone layer. Really, that's a testament to that period of time, and its discovery now is pretty significant. So that may change entire outlooks on climate change, if true. Let me move on to what is our final point here. And this is here near Geneva. This is CERN, the CERN lab. And this is the Large Hadron Collider has turned back on. So the Large Hadron Collider has been turned back on, and it's set to smash particles together and never before seen energy levels. It's nearly 17 miles long, or 27 kilometers, in a loop. So it's a giant circle that accelerates particles almost the speed of light and smashes them together in order to test different theories about the universe. That's how the Large Hadron Collider works. It uses 13.6 trillion electron volts, which is currently a record-breaking energy levels. So pretty impressive amount. And this is where they think they're going to be able to make tiny black holes, essentially. This is how they test how the universe works in a small scale. This is the third run of the Large Hadron Collider, and it's slated to last for 4 continual years. The collisions will be halted once more for additional upgrades to push the LHC to an even greater power level. Once again, it has been upgraded and begins running again in 2029. Once it has been upgraded and begins running again in 2029, high luminosity LHC is expected to capture 10 times the data of the previous 3 runs combined. So we can take, and you guys can go and you can take a look at the Live Science article and the CERN article itself regarding the Hadron Collider. But pretty cool. I mean, this is how we actually test, theories that we have about our universe and find new things to theorize about as to how the universe actually works. I mean, black holes, how stars are created, how galaxies form, how they dissipate, all sorts of things. Now, wormholes, string theory, all that gets tested with the Hadron Collider. So it's pretty cool. It's a huge topic in and of itself. Way more information than I could ever comprehend. But it's a pretty cool development. It's a huge huge scientific development and it's cool to see that it's going to be back up and running, and hopefully we're going to get a lot more cool sciencey stuff to add, hopefully, here to the news, and kind of make it a little bit more uplifting towards the end of the night coming out of here, and learn some too. I'd love to learn something out of this. But that actually ends our night here on the channel, and so I want to thank you guys for joining us here at the New News, of course. So it's been amazing that you guys have come here and joined us, and continue to come back and enjoy the news. Obviously, there's the whole project of this channel is to give back to the very news that we talk about here every day. We're never doing super chats, and we're never pushing anything, any merchandise or anything. 100% of what we do is going to be doing it for charity purposes. So if you check out the description below, you're going to see a ton of different charities that are linked down there, all of which have been vetted by us to make sure that they are legitimate charities. Of course, we don't want our viewers to get scammed or anything, and also we want to make sure that that these charities are actually going and helping people with the majority of their funds. That's why 80% or more of all of these charities, their donations, 80% or more of their donations actually go to the programs and helping people, while 20% or less, with the majority being on the emphasis on the or less, actually the donations are going to that administration costs and salaries. We want to help people, not pay a CEO salary. So please make sure to check out all those organizations. Please make sure to check out locations that are not just Ukraine. I know that's the highlight right now, but other places like Ethiopia, Somalia, Southeast Asia, they're not getting that attention, and there are millions of people that are affected by climate change, war, death, famine, the whole 9 yards, going through what's happening in these regions. And if you have more, please, our Discord link is also in the description. Check it out as well. And also let a staff member on there know if you have one we can add. We're constantly looking for more. In fact, we're vetting several right now to add. And please check them, please let us know so we can continue adding to that list, especially if you have locations that we don't necessarily have yet. We want to help people all over the world. And once we get large enough, we'll actually be putting donation streams directly on here on the channel. There will be links, and you can donate strictly, directly through YouTube itself. So, but we have a long way until that point. So until then, check out the links in the description. Let us know if you have more. And if you can't give a lot to these organizations, give a little. If you can't give anything at all, that's completely understandable. But give us a like and subscribe, and let your friends know about us. The more people that are here, more people that can enjoy the way that we do the news. But most importantly, the more people that are here, the more of a meaningful impact we can have on people's lives throughout the world, which is what we want to do here. So thank you for supporting those organizations, and thank you for supporting the channel and allowing us to be the news that gives back. And with that, I hope that you guys have a great rest of your night. I hope that you guys have a great and safe day tomorrow. I hope that you, your friends, and your family remain safe. And if not, I hope that you do find that safety and security in the near future. I really don't want any of the viewers to be going through this, the very same stuff that we report on here on the news. I don't want any of you guys to be added to those statistics. So I hope that you guys do remain safe. Enjoy the rest of your night, and tomorrow, it's Thursday tomorrow. We're getting pretty close to the weekend, so keep your head high and try to finish out the week strong. So have a great night, everybody. My name is Paul from the New News, and I will hopefully see you guys all once again tomorrow at 10 p.m. Eastern Time, 9 p.m. Central. Have a wonderful night, everyone.